Hi, welcome back to CJ 213. We're going to dive into Chapter 3 Community Corrections, Diversion, and Probation. Okay, the development of community based corrections. So, community corrections goes all the way back to English common law. Judicial reprieve allowed judges to suspend judgment and consider new evidence. Recognizance let offenders remain free if they promised repayment or good behavior. And sureties were individuals who agreed to take responsibility for someone released from custody. Even those in early systems, the idea was the same. Not every offender needed to be locked away. I often found myself, I don't know how many men I supervised could have succeeded if they'd been given a true community-based alternative. Many didn't need a maximum security bed. They need structure, they need supervision, accountability, without being cut off from their families or their communities. So the United States, one of the pioneers was John Augustus. He was born in Boston in 1841. He bailed out and supervised nearly 2,000 probationers over an 18-year period. His work led to formal establishment of probation in Boston by 1859. That tells us something important. The roots of community corrections are about rehabilitation, about giving offenders a chance to prove themselves. I saw this repeatedly play out in Pontiac. Some inmates told me that probation was the best thing that ever happened to them before they slipped up. For others, probation gave them a stability long enough to make some real changes. Augustus's model still resonates nearly 2 centuries later. Now fast forward to the 60s, 1960s, when we see what was called the Community Corrections Revolution. This was part of a larger movement focused on rehabilitation and reintegration. The idea was simple. Return offenders to the community as soon as possible, rebuild social ties, and use community programs instead of prisons. But there's also a practical reason. It's cost. Probation was far cheaper than incarceration. I saw firsthand differences here. Housing someone in a maximum security prison was incredibly expensive. Probably give you the number. I know at the time that I was there, it was for a maximum security population inmate, I believe it was right around $50,000 to $60,000 a year. So add all that up with all the inmates that were incarcerated throughout the state. That's a lot of money. So it's practical reasons cost. So it's far cheaper than incarceration. Well, community corrections, when it worked, it not only saved money, but it reduced this overcrowding in prisons like ours, because ours was very overcrowded. Most prisons still are overcrowded. Okay, the Community Corrections Act. It was a state-based initiative that gave counties subsidies to divert offenders from prison. It required legislative authorization, local planning, and even citizen involvement. Communities became directly invested in how corrections was done at a local level. From my perspective, this was critical. When offenders stayed in their communities with proper supervision, families often remained intact. A broken family is one of the primary reasons why offenders going back out into the world, as you say, it failed because there was no intact family. It was broken. So that stability mattered if those offenders ever did come back to prison and eventually return home. Community investment created a safety net that pure incarceration just couldn't provide. So diversion programs are one of the main tools in community corrections. True diversion means charges are dropped after the offender successfully completes a program. Minimization of system penetration tries to limit the offender's contact with the justice system using deferred judgment or probation before judgment. In Pontiac, I often met men who said, if I would have got diversion, I wouldn't be here. And in many cases, I believed them. Sometimes the first contact with the criminal justice system is the most critical moment. If handled wisely, properly, it can really redirect somebody's life. So other diversion programs included deferred prosecution, where no guilty plea is required and the offender serves probation in place of formal charges. Treatment alternatives to street crime, known as the TASC, uses screening, intake, and tracking units to guide offenders into treatment. Those kind of programs can keep people from ever even stepping foot inside a prison. I can tell you that once somebody enters maximum security, their life trajectory changes dramatically. Diversion programs can prevent that irreversible step. But there are also specific diversion alternatives like the Brooklyn Young Adult Court, Evanston's diversion program here in Illinois, and Manhattan's Project Reset. Other programs like AIM Court, Achieve, Inspire, Motivate, that targets young offenders. These specialized courts recognize that not all offenders are the same. Some, especially young adults, may just need structure. They may just need mentoring and accountability to just get them back on track. I saw many young men who told me that their crimes were impulsive. It was tied to their peers, or just really poor judgment. If programs like AIM Court had existed in the communities, their paths may not have. Actually, their paths probably would have been very different. So specialized problem solving courts are another branch of diversion. These focus on specific issues like drugs, domestic violence, juvenile offenses. They use case management and collaboration between judges, probation officers, and social services. Drug courts, in particular, have had a major impact. I can't tell you how many inmates I've supervised, been around, who were there because of drug-related crimes. For many of them, addiction, not criminal intent, was the driving factor. Problem-solving courts they recognize that, and they try to address the root issue instead of just the behavior. Okay, probation. This is the big one. Obviously, you see 1 of 17, so there's a lot that goes in probation, because it is the backbone of community corrections. It allows convicted offenders to remain in the community under supervision following conditions set by the court. Conditions may include restitution, community service, drug testing, or maintaining employment. I heard countless guys say that they wish they would have taken probation seriously. They admitted the rules were not impossible, they just didn't value the opportunity. Probation is not a free pass. It's accountability with freedom. And when respected, it can keep someone out of prison altogether. So nearly 4 million adults are on probation in the U.S. Despite falling crime rates, for some reason, I don't think there's falling crime rates. I actually think there's an uptick in crime rates, but the book is going to tell you that crime rates are falling. I really believe that they're going up. So with that, probation population has continued to rise over the last 20 years, or 2 decades. A quarter of probationers have been convicted of violent offenses. Many struggle with substance abuse or mental health issues. That was obvious to me working in the prison. Even those who failed probation often had untreated addiction, definitely mental illness, and this was at the core of their struggles. So until we address those root issues, probation, it's just always going to be an uphill climb. So nearly half of all probationers are felons. And some of these issues include reentry barriers, overburdened probation officers, higher technical violation rates, uh, community safety concerns, drug dependency, and definitely mental illness. We touched on that. Family strain, social accountability from the financial burdens, and just having that stigma of being an offender, and obviously the supervision requirements. I saw what happened when probation failed. Men returned to prison, sometimes even more hardened than before. That's why community corrections, they have to strike a balance between compassion and accountability. So probation, it's granted by a judge in federal and the state courts. In some states, even juries may recommend probation. But how often probation is used depends on the local laws, the culture, the resources. I noticed that some counties seem to use probation far more than others. That inconsistency meant two men with the same crime could face two very different realities. I've touched on this before. One on probation, the other in maximum security. Two totally different worlds. So over time, probation has shifted towards risk assessment, and increased surveillance. Public concern about crime led agencies to move away from counseling and toward control. Intensive probation programs emerged along with risk management systems and what's known as new penology. It focuses on regulation more than rehabilitation. I saw this change reflected definitely inside Pontiac. Many inmates describe probation not as support, but as surveillance. For some, that constant pressure pushed them to succeed. For others, it just set them up for failure. But the truth is, strict supervision without support often leads to these technical violations, missed appointments, failed drug tests, and all these will send people right back into prison without committing new crimes. So probation administration in the U.S. is very diverse. There are about 2,000 adult probation agencies. Some are state-run, others local. About 30 states combine probation and parole into a single agency. A few even privatize probation supervision for very low-risk offenders. Each model has pros, it has cons. State-run systems bring consistency, but can be bureaucratic. Local control offers flexibility. Sorry, I forgot to advance the slide. I'll leave this up here for you for a minute. So make sure you get these. I'll probably share these PowerPoints without the video, and that way you can kind of still kind of go through them. But I just wanted to make sure that you got these and you can see, because a lot of stuff on the test will come from the PowerPoints. I just want to make sure that you see it. So whatever. So bureaucratic. So local control allows flexibility, but it definitely lacks resources. So at Pontiac, we saw the effects of both. Some men said that probation officers were fair and supportive. Others felt overwhelmed by the red tape, the bureaucracy, and the inconsistency. So how probation is administered shapes whether it succeeds or it fails. So I'll leave this up for you. It kind of gives you a rundown of the difference between probation and parole. This is probation, often given to defendants instead of jail or prison time. Court sends a sentence. I'm gonna actually let you read this. You can come back to it and just kind of read through this. But this really gives you the differences between the two, because a lot of people mistake probation and parole. We have this probation, we have probation officers, and you also have parole agents. Two totally different things. So this will really, really kind of give you an idea of what the differences are. Okay, so probation officers, they have a big range of duties: case management, supervision, surveillance, court reports, and uh, pre-sentence investigation reports. But probationers also retain certain legal rights. So these cases like this: Williams versus New York, Minnesota versus Murphy, Morrissey versus Brewer. So it established limits and protections. Probationers have fewer rights than ordinary citizens, but they do retain due process when facing revocation. Again, just going to let you go through these. Okay, so is probation effective? For misdemeanors, recidivism is relatively low. For felons, most are rearrested. Women are more likely to receive probation, especially for property or drug offenses. Improving probation requires more resources, public credibility, evidence-based practices. Some contemporary options include deferred sentences, shock probation, split sentences, and intensive supervised probation. Technology is also playing a big role with the GPS monitoring, automated phone check-ins, and continuous alcohol and drug testing. I saw the impact of these innovations. Some men said electronic monitoring kept them accountable. It just felt like a leash. Either way, the technology kept them in the community instead of being inside a prison cell. Probation continues to evolve. It continues. Uh, it remains the most common form of correctional control in the United States. And for many offenders, it represents not just a sentence, but it represents a second chance. So, in this chapter, we've seen how community corrections developed from English laws to John Augustus in Boston through the 1960s rehabilitation movement and today's modern probation systems. We've examined diversion programs, specialized courts, probation practices, and the difference between treatment and surveillance. For my 23 years of pioneering, I can say this: when community corrections works, it keeps families together. It saves resources. It reduces overcrowding. When it fails, often it leads men to places like a maximum security prison where hope is really hard to find. That's why this chapter matters. Community corrections is not just an alternative to prison, it is a vital part of shaping justice in America. All right. I will see you for week 3 when we move on to chapter 4.